We're gonna take a table made of MDF. We're gonna glaze our rock edge, put an ultimate top coat, and take this little project to the next level. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a table that we made out of MDF. We have a video on that, so you may wanna check that video out. The glaze is gonna really make that rock edge pop and give it a lot of character. So, what we're gonna do first, we're gonna come in with Rust-Oleum. It's an antiquing glaze. You can use any kind of glaze you want. You can use a Rust-Oleum brand, you can use an acrylic paint, just about anything that you want to use. You just want to make sure it's 100% dry before you go to your next step. So because this is a glaze, I have a lot of open time. So I'm not worried about having to work fast. All right, so now I have the glaze on. I'm just gonna very softly wipe that glaze off. Now, this is where your individual preference comes in. If you want a really high contrast look, you're gonna leave a lot of glaze in the lower areas. So if you get too much on the surface and you want to pull some of that glaze off, just take you a wet paper towel, this is just water, and you can pull that back off and just leave a little bit in the low areas. Now you can see the difference between the depth here and here where there's no glaze at all. Okay, so the glaze is dried, and now it's time for our flood coat. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna scuff up the surface with just a 220, and that way our flood coat will have a bite to it. All right, so now I want to scuff up the edges a little bit, but I wanna be really, really careful that I don't pull all my glaze off. So I'm just gonna very lightly hit the edge. All right, now we're gonna come in and remove all of the dust with just alcohol, being very careful that we don't rub too much because it will pull our glaze off. The table is a 36-inch diameter, so that gives us about 7 square feet. I've mixed up 3 ounces per square foot, and that's what we're gonna use for our flood coat. So when you pour out, make sure if you scrape your edges that you pour that material into the middle of your resin. So what we can do now, just in case the resin on the side of the bucket wasn't mixed 100%, putting it in the middle and coming back and mixing is gonna really ensure that our product is mixed. So the material is on the table. I'm gonna trial it out, and I'm gonna use a 1/8 by 1/8 inch square notch trowel. That's gonna help me make sure that I have the correct amount of product on the table. Be sure that your table is level before you get started. Now this is where I come back and I like to use my hands. I love to use my hands at this point. It just helps me to really get the epoxy over the edges in all of the little nooks and crannies on the rock edge. And I also wrap my fingers around the edges so that when I pull that epoxy, I'll bring it down under the edge so that the epoxy doesn't pool right here on the edge. It's gonna kind of run back and drip. Okay, so once I've spread the material out, now I'm gonna torch it really quickly and get rid of any bubbles that have come to the top. So when I'm torching, I don't like to add a lot of heat to my edges. So I'm not actually gonna bring this torch out and heat my edges unless I really see a lot of bubbles. Because what happens, that makes the epoxy really thin, and then it's going to run off a lot quicker. So very little heat. I'll torch, I'll wait about 5 minutes, I'll torch it one more time, and then I'll let this sit overnight, and we'll be ready to apply the ultimate top coat tomorrow. Okay, so on my edges, I just take my sandpaper and very lightly scuff. Now I'm not really worried about getting in every little nook and cranny. The ultimate top coat is really good about adhesion, so I'm not that worried about it. Okay, so what we've done to address the drips underneath the table is about 4 hours after we poured the table, I took a little stick, a little tongue depressor, and I ran the tongue depressor around the edge and took care of the drips. Now, if I had not have done that, I would have drips right here, and I would just flip the table over, hit it with a sander, get it nice and smooth, and then we would start with the UTC. UTC is a fabulous product. It's by Stone Coat Countertop, and it gives a really natural matte finish and an incredible durability. It's amazing. Heat resistance, scratch resistance, has UVA protection in it, so it's a great, great product. The product is a 2-to-1 mixture. So what we do first is we're gonna prep the rollers, and these are the rollers that we use. It's the 6-inch rollers from Home Depot. The main thing is that it's 1/4-inch nap. This is the main thing. If you use a higher nap roller, you're gonna end up with an orange peel type of a texture, and that's what we do not want. All right, you can use microfiber rollers. They're a little bit more expensive, a little bit harder to find, but they will work, and they're great rollers. I really like these rollers. They're readily available, and they give me a good result. All right, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna prep the rollers first. The reason we prep them is because we don't want the little fuzzy lint to get out into our project. So what we'll do first is get just regular painter's tape, and I just get me a roll out, a couple of strips, and then I'll just take the roller. I'll prep one roller that I'm gonna use for laying the product down, which is what I'm gonna call my wet roller. And for every one wet roller, I do 2 dry rollers. All right, so I'm gonna prep them the same, but these I'm gonna use actually to feather out the material, and you'll see later in the process how we use the dry rollers. Make sure after you prep them, don't put them down on a dirty table. Put them somewhere where they'll stay nice and clean. The ultimate top coat is a 2-to-1 ratio mixture. So when you get your bottles, your A is going to need to be shaken really good. I kind of like to agitate it slowly. I don't like to shake it too hard because you're going to get bubbles in there. But it's real important because when it's made and then shipped and sitting on the shelf, a lot of your mattifying agents will sink to the bottom. So if you don't shake it up good and then you pour it, you're not going to get a lot of the agents that cause the product to give that matte finish. You're not going to get that, and you'll get shiny spots. So make sure that before you use it, you really stir it up very, very well. I know that my square footage on that table is 7 square feet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 7 square feet, and I'm going to multiply that by 0.375. That is our sweet spot so that we don't end up having a lot of material left over after we do a project. All right, so that equals 2.62. I'm going to round that up to 3, and I know that with 3 ounces, my 2-to-1 ratio is going to be 2 ounces of part A and 1 ounce of part B. All right, so let's get started mixing. I have these little cups. I get them on Amazon. They've got really good calibrations, so I really like those. And I'll put a link to these cups down in the show notes. We're gonna do 2 ounces of part A and 1 ounce of part B. Now, as soon as you put these two together, you've got about 15 minutes of good working time with this product. If you wait too long, it does get really thick and sticky, and it's hard to get a very smooth finish. For every 4 ounces of mixed material, we add 1 capful of water that comes with the bottle. So we don't have quite 4 ounces here. So being 3 ounces, I'm adding about 2/3 of a capful. And like I said, you're on a time schedule. So you really want to have everything ready and prepped before you start mixing up your product. All right, so I'm gonna start off with a wet roller and a dry roller. As I load up my wet roller, I wanna make sure that I really saturate that roller. That's the key to getting product nice and thick on your surface. You wanna make sure you have coverage over the entire table, but you don't wanna overwork that material. I'm not really worried about lap lines because I'm gonna feather all of this product out with my dry roller. Very lightly. I'm not worried about my lap lines as long as I very, very lightly roll to address my edges. We do it a little different when we have a rock edge. I'm just gonna go around really quickly, and then I'm gonna come back with a foam brush, and we're just gonna kind of tap that in so that we don't have big areas of buildup of the product. And you do not want to go back and re-roll where you already have it on the surface, because you will mess up the finish. So I've got the UTC on the surface. When it goes on, it's gonna be a little bit cloudy. You'll be able to see a little bit of lap lines when you first put the product on, but as it dries, it'll dry clear and your lap lines will disappear. So let me talk to you guys a little bit about problems that you can have when you're doing the UTC. The most I hear from people are it leaves a orange peel texture. A couple of reasons why it leaves an orange peel. One, you've used a nap roller that's too large. You use something bigger than a 1/4 inch nap. That really holds on to that material. As you roll it, it leaves peaks, and that's why you can't get a nice smooth finish. So make sure you're using a 1/4 inch nap roller. Also, if you don't put enough water, if you have it really thick, it's really hard to feather that out and get a nice smooth finish if you don't have enough water. So 1 capful of water for every 4 ounces of mixed material. Another thing that will cause a texture feel is if you're doing a really large area and you let the product sit in your pan for too long, or you take too long to roll it out on the surface. You've got about 15 minutes of good working time before your material starts to thicken up and get what I call tacky. As you start rolling it, if you feel your rollers kind of dragging and not really flowing and rolling really smoothly, that's what's happening is your product's getting kind of tacky and it's hard to get that smoothness. Now, I told you guys at the first of the video that I prepped 2 dry rollers for every 1 wet roller. In this case, it was a very small project. I didn't have to use both of my dry rollers. But if I were doing a long countertop, I would use my wet roller, lay my product down, and then hopefully if it was really big, I would have someone helping me. But I would switch my dry roller to another dry roller once I felt that roller getting wet, basically soaking up all of the product as I pull it off the table. So if I'm taking a dry roller and I use it a lot and it becomes basically now a wet roller, I'm not able to feather that product out, and then I'm gonna get lap lines. So if you get lap lines, that's a lot of the reason. It's because your dry roller has become wet and you're not able to pull the product off. Okay, so cleaning up after you do the UTC. Throw your rollers away. Guys, don't try to save these. They're impossible to clean. But I do save my pans. If you wash them out immediately with soap and water, you can use these pans over and over again. As far as everything else, your cup, your stick, everything else, you'll just need to throw away. Once you've applied your UTC, there's a couple of things that you need to know. One, if you come back and you see a little bit of gloss, peeking through your finish, you cannot go back with your roller and roll it right then. If you do, you're gonna mess up your entire piece. What you're gonna need to do, let it dry overnight and then come back and reapply another coat. Unfortunately, you can't do touch-ups on the UTC because you'll be able to see then your lap lines. So the best thing to do would be just to lightly sand and reapply. Also, you wanna make sure that you let this dry if you're in cold weather. If you're in really cold weather, let it dry at least 12 hours before you touch it. Hot weather, sometimes you can touch it as little as 4 hours. So be very conscious of the weather and the temperature when you do this. For all these products that we used, check out my website, RK3designs.com. And if you would like to see how we made this table from scratch using MDF, check out the video, MDF to Granite. And we'll show you how we built the table, did the rock edge, and did the finish on top. Don't forget, until next time, don't be scared, move forward, and be creative.